Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you level up with IT learning everywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis, for this episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. We're going to be supporting printers, and you're going to be helping us, and the man who's going to show us the way is Don Pizzette. Don, good to have you here. Thank you.
Glad to be back, Zach. And we are tackling the exciting topic of printing today. And I know some of you are probably thinking, look, I don't use printers anymore. We're supposed to be going green and digital documents, but in the business world, paper is still a very real
Gotta
thing.
have it.
And printers are kind of a required tool of the trade. So when you're out there in the workforce, you're going to encounter printers. And there are few things that can disrupt an office as much as a printer going down. So we need to be able to support printers, especially in a Linux environment. Now, that might be from printing from a server, might be from printing from just a workstation, but we need to understand how to get that set up, how to make sure it's working, and how to kind of troubleshoot it. How do we even see what the printing service is doing in the background? And that's all stuff that we're going to be taking a look at right here in this episode.
So, Don, do all Linux distributions handle printing the same way?
We're really lucky on this one in that most of them do. And when I say most, I mean like 9 out of 10. It wasn't always like that. Just about 15 years ago, it was the Wild West of printing out there. Everybody handled printing differently. Microsoft handled it one way, Apple handled it another. Each Linux distro was kind of left to their own. And the only thing that we had of any kind of consistency was what was called the Line Printer Daemon, or LPD. And LPD was designed to print to mainframe printers. If you're not familiar with line printers, they're the big tractor-fed printers. They have gears that move little paper.
Yeah,
they have
they're
little
very
holes
loud.
along the side. Very loud.
Very loud.
And they usually had green and white lines on them. So that's people usually called it green and white paper because it was green and white made of paper, I guess. But that's old school. I mean, you see it in movies now, but you don't see it in real life very often. Some of you might actually encounter it in bigger mainframe environments. But today we print on just regular paper, right? 8.5 by 11 if you're here in the U.S. or A1 if you're in Europe or whatever. It's different. And when that revolution happened, when people switched over to regular paper, every printer kind of functioned differently, and it was a mess. Well, most of the printer manufacturers looked out there and they said, look, most business computers are running Microsoft Windows, so we'll write a Windows driver and just be done with it. That's it. Now we support most people. And that left Apple high and dry, and it left Linux high and dry. So you had really spotty printer support as you move from vendor to vendor because a lot of the Linux distros were trying to reverse engineer print drivers and so on. Well, oddly enough, Apple kind of stepped in to save the day. And I know most people don't like Apple, and that's fine. But in this one case, they actually did a really good thing. When they released OS X, they switched to a BSD base. And BSD is actually more Unix-like than Linux is. So Linux is designed to be Unix compatible. BSD actually is Unix. And so when Apple switched that platform, they had to figure out printing. And they knew that hardware manufacturers weren't supporting it. And so what they decided to do was to come up with a new printing platform. But in order to get the most support, they decided to open source that and release it to everybody so that everybody could use it. So now you had this multi-billion-dollar international business pumping money into Linux printing or Unix printing, and all the Linux distros got to benefit. And you can see that on the website. Let me bring this up here. If you go to cups.org, cups.org, that's the Common Unix Printing System. Apple wrote it, so it says right here, CUPS is the standards-based open source printing system developed by Apple Incorporated for macOS and other Unix-like operating systems. When they created this, it was a standard way for Unix systems to handle printers. And so now all those hardware manufacturers like HP, Brother, Canon, Lexmark, so on, they now say, look, I can write a driver for Windows, and that'll cover most users. But now I can write a driver for CUPS, and that'll cover Mac and pretty much every Linux distro too. That's a win-win for everybody. And so today, printer support is way better than it used to be, and it's almost always handled by the CUPS system. So if you're on Ubuntu or Red Hat Enterprise Linux or Fedora or Mint or Slackware, they all use CUPS to handle their printing. If you're on a real fringe OS, maybe not, but otherwise, CUPS is going to be the way to do it.
So what do we need to do to install CUPS, Don?
Well, oddly enough, it's actually installed by default on almost all distros, unless if you do like a minimal install, right? So let's say I install CentOS Server and I choose minimal, it doesn't install CUPS in that case. So you might have to install it, but the odds are it's already there. And you can double check a few different ways. Probably the easiest way is to try and install it. You know, if you do I'm on CentOS, so I'm going to do a sudo yum list. If I was on Ubuntu or Debian, I would do a sudo apt list, and I'm just going to look for cups. And it's going to look for the cups package, and I can see it right here on mine. It's already in the installed packages. So I've already got cups installed. If I didn't, I would just change that list word to install, and then it would actually install it, and I'd have it up and running. So pretty easy to get it going. Just because it's installed doesn't actually mean that it's running, though. So it might not be up and going. So you might need to do you might need to start it up. On a systemd system, you'll just say sudo systemctl enable -- now cups. And what that's telling it, enable is telling it, I want it to start when the system boots up. So whenever the system boots, make sure cups is running. And then -- now says, I want to actually start it right now too, right? And so that's going to get it up and going and enabled. And so when you run that, that'll take effect. Hopefully that takes care of it. And then you can verify its status by doing a sudo systemctl status cups. And it'll return back, and I can see that it's active and running. I guess I could have checked the status in the beginning to see if it was installed too, but if it wasn't running, I wouldn't have seen it there. So that's basically how we get it installed. It's that easy. And once it's in place, now it's ready to manage our printers.
So what printing protocols does Cups support?
It actually supports a lot of different things. Depending on what you're trying to achieve, it does Internet Printing Protocol. It does LPD. It supports the old line printer daemon, so you can use that. It also has socket-based printing, which is used by some, like even HP JetDirect cards and stuff. They'll use socket-based printing in some cases. It does serial and even HTTP and HTTPS for submission of jobs. And that's just out of the box. We can add a lot more protocols to it if you want. So I mentioned HP. HP, you can do socket-based printing to HP printers, but they have these JetDirect boards that communicate a very specific way. And so HP actually releases a special driver to be able to dump in that upgrades cups to basically support their printers. If you ever want to install that, because HP is pretty popular, you would just search your repository for your printer manufacturer. So in my case, I'm talking about HP, so I'll say sudo yum install, and their package is called HP LIP, HP LIP, or Hewlett-Packard Linux Internetwork Printing, I believe is what it stands for. But basically, when you go to install that, it's going to load what's basically a print driver pack, a whole collection of print drivers that support HP printers to make it where you're ready to print to them. And all you have to do is install that. And that's extending the functionality of Cups. Now, when I go into Cups to set up a printer, instead of just seeing the list I kind of rattled off a moment ago, I'll see a new entry in there for HP. And as you add other things, you may see new entries pop up. So mostly, though, printers these days rely on IPP, the Internet Printing Protocol. And that's supported by Cups right out of the box. And that will work with darn near every vendor that's out there.
So how do we add a printer to Cups, Don?
All right, so we've got Cups up and running, but we don't actually have a printer set up yet. So we've got to add one in. And there's a few ways to do it. You can do it from the command line. I'll show you that in a moment. But honestly, the easiest way, when you install Cups, it brings up a web interface, a web management service that you can use. So if you just fire up a web browser, I'm going to switch back over to Firefox. You can browse to your local host. So I'm just going to browse to, here, let me zoom in so you guys can see what I'm typing. So I'm going to browse to 127.0.0.1:631. All right. That's 631 right there. That's telling it port 631, which is what Cups runs on. And when you browse to it with a web browser, you'll see this web page right here, which is telling us, hey, this is Cups, the standards-based open source printing software developed by Apple, just like we saw on their web page a minute ago. But masked across the top here, it's kind of hard to see because Apple insists on doing light gray on white. I don't know why they do that. But I can see a number of tabs that are what's going to actually let me get in and configure things. If I jump over here to printers, I'll see a list of the printers on my system. I have no printers, right? If I go back over to administration, though, I'll see where I can manage the server. And right here, I can choose to add a printer. So if I want to connect a new printer to my system, I can punch that in. I'll have to authenticate. If this is your first time using Cups, you have to log in with an administrative user. Now, I'm logged in with my own user account, dpossett, which is just a regular user. So in order to be an admin here, I'm going to use the root account to get access to the system. So let me just punch that in. And that should authenticate me. There we go. And now I can come in and I can add a printer. Now, most of what I'm seeing would have been here by default. All right. So, for example, LPD, Internet Printing Protocol, HTTP, Windows Printer via Samba, those were there by default. But because I installed HP LIP or HPLIP, I've got 2 extra entries up here for HP Printer and Fax. Those are showing up right there. And I've got AppSocket, which normally would just say socket, but now it says AppSocket/HP JetDirect. So I've got that HP support has been kind of added in. And so if I want to add a printer, I need to pick the protocol that I'm going to use. Now, if you're unsure of the protocol you're going to use, most printers actually do support the line printer daemon, LPD. Even though it's designed for old mainframes, even your home printers usually have some kind of LPD support. That's just one of the standards they've latched onto. As long as you have the driver to be able to access and talk to that printer, you'll be able to load it up and get to it. In my case, though, I've got an HP printer. Now, if I had a local HP, if it was plugged into a USB port, for example, then I would choose one of these top 2 options. But in my case, it's not local. It's a network printer. So I'm going to come down here and choose to do a AppSocket HP JetDirect printer. And when I hit continue, now it's going to ask for that connection. I need to point it at the printer. And so some printers, you just need to type in socket : / and then the IP address of your printer. Others, you might actually need to specify a subdirectory on. You'll have to check your printer documentation. Sometimes they'll have a Q that you point to. So you'll see a /QUE, or QUEUE. There we go. I can spell. Well, they actually give examples right here. You can see like LPD here is pointing directly to a Q. Maybe it's just a host name. Here they've got like a port number, port 9100. That's actually the default for most JetDirect cards. In my case, it should automatically detect that. And when we hit continue, it's going to ask us for a name for that printer so we can add that in. So, for example, in my case, this is a HP LaserJet. It does not like spaces. That's why I'm using underscores. A LaserJet M506 is what that printer happens to be. And you can give it a description, a location. You can choose to share it if you want to make it available for other people. And we can hit continue. And once that's done, now it's going to ask us about what driver to use for this printer. And you've got a number of vendors that are already in the list, and you might be able to come through and find yours. Hopefully you can. I'm going to choose HP. And if I continue forward, then I'll see a big list of HP printers. And somewhere in here, you can navigate around and hopefully find your printer. I don't want to spend half the episode hunting around, so I'm going to pick something that's just close. M552, that seems close enough. All right, so I'll pick that one. Remember, if you pick the wrong driver, you might have certain options that don't work. Like maybe you can't print in duplex, or it's a color printer and you can only print black and white. Maybe you have extra paper trays, but they're not being detected. That's what happens when you pick the wrong driver. All right. In my case, I'm just going to pick it and choose add. And now I've got a printer on my system. It's asking me if I want to change my default options. You can go through and change all sorts of stuff here, but I'm just going to choose set the default options. And now I have a printer on my system. Now that's all doing it via the web interface. But what if I have a printer that's only available via the command line? Now I've got a minimal install server that doesn't have a GUI, right? Well, in theory, I could browse to the CUPS webpage from a laptop or some other system, or I can do all this stuff from the command line. So let's run through that again. Now, where it differs is on the command line, I don't get a crazy menu where I can pick a printer driver or whatever. I need to already have the printer driver there and know its name. Now, if you know its name and it's pre-installed, you're in business. If it isn't pre-installed, you need to get one. Well, printer drivers under CUPS are distributed as PPD files, which I believe stands for PostScript Printer Descriptor or Description. But either way, it's basically a profile that describes how that printer works and how you're allowed to communicate with it. You can download those PPD files from most vendors. So before the show, I went to HP's website and poked around, and I found a PPD file for the HP Color LaserJet M553. And that was one I saw built into the menus earlier. If you want to make use of that file, what you need to do is put that into the CUPS PPD directory. If you look into /etc/CUPS/PPD, that folder right there contains the printer definition files. And I have a HP LaserJet M506 sitting right there. That's from the printer that I added a moment ago. Well, I could take this new PPD that I've got and copy it in here to have that support. You do need to be an administrator to do that. So let me get back to my directory where I downloaded that. And I'm going to do a sudo cp, and I'm going to copy that PPD file to /etc/CUPS cups/ppd and drop it right in there. And Cups will see that PPD file and recognize it, and now it knows how to talk to those printers. Now all I need to do is to create a printer that's actually going to use it. And so for that, I'm going to use a command called lp admin. Right? This is the line printer administration tool. It's a very old tool. It's a System 5 Unix tool, and I'm going to use it basically to create and define this printer. First, I'll tell it what server I'm working on, and in my case, I'm on the server, so I'll just say -h localhost, right? So that's the host that I'm configuring. I'll do -p to give it a printer name, and I'm going to call this one HP LaserJet M553, and I'm doing underscores instead of spaces because, again, it doesn't like spaces. Then I'll do a -e, which just says I want to enable the printer. Otherwise, the printer's disabled when you create it. You might want to do that to go check and make sure it's got paper in the tray or something. I don't know. So then I'll say -v, how I'm going to talk to it. And I'm going to use a socket connection to this one. I'll say socket : //10.0.10.50. That's my other printer IP. I'm going to cheat and use the same IP. Then we need to tell it about the PPD file. So I'll do a -P, and I'll tell it which PPD file to use. So I'll point it to /etc/cups/ppd/HP color LaserJet M553-ps.ppd. Rolls right off the tongue.
It does.
And that's the last piece of information it needs. When I run that, it's going to run and add that printer. You can see up here, my GUI actually gave me a little notification letting me know the printer was added. But the printer's on there, and so now I've added one via the command line. Way easier from the web interface. You don't have to remember all these command line options, but it can be done from the command line as well.
So now that we have a printer, how do we use it?
All right, using the printer is actually pretty easy. If you're in the GUI, you just go into your application, go to File and Print, right? Most applications have a file print or an icon for printing or whatever. So the GUI side, that's a no-brainer. On the command line, though, we actually need to leverage some of our older command line utilities. The same commands we'd use to send a print job to a line printer, we can use that to send print jobs to any printer. So if I want to print, let's see, we have some old documents, don't we, from earlier shows? I've got this calendar, my 2019 calendar. I want to print that out to one of the printers that I just made. So in order to do that, what I would do is type LP, so that's the line printer, and then I need to tell it a destination. So I'll do -D, and then the name of the printer. So each time I created a printer, I gave it a name, like HP _ LaserJet _ M553. That was one of my printer names. The other one was M506, right? So that's the name. And then I specify what file I want to print. And so I'm going to point that to my calendar. That is just a text file. And when I run that, it's going to take that text file and it's going to submit it to the printer queue. Now, being submitted to the printer queue just means that it's in the software queue. It goes into /var/spool is where those go. And now it's reaching out to talk to the hardware printer. And since I chose the wrong driver for that printer, I'm not sure if it's actually going to print. We'll have to see. A lot of HP printers use the same driver, so it may actually print for me. But it's going to get submitted over to that printer, and hopefully we hear, print jobs rattling out or whatever. Now, I can check on the status of a print job by doing LP stat -P and the name of that printer. So that was HP LaserJet _ M553. And so when I do that, it's going to tell me a little information about that printer. And when I look at mine, it says the printer is idle. So it looks like it actually printed. There's no jobs that are stuck in there. If there was a print job going on right now, I should see that there was a job waiting. In my case, I see nothing. And I can verify that via the web interface as well. In the web interface, you can go to jobs, and you'll see any jobs that are waiting to be printed. Or you can go to printers, and when you view an individual printer, you'd see its status over there. Oop, I clicked too fast. Well, actually, you'd see the jobs here too, where I clicked. But going back, under status, you wouldn't see idle, you would see printing. So my print job is already cleared, and if I were to go across the building to that printer, it might be printed right, but since I used the wrong driver, it might be garbled up and things. Those are all stuff that can happen with the wrong driver.
Don, can you set a default printer from the CLI?
You can. In the GUI, we almost always do that, right? We don't want to have to pick a printer every time. So, when you're looking at the printer list, you can pick who your default printer is. Or even if you don't, it's just a matter of picking from a menu.
Right.
But for the command line, it's a lot harder because you have to type in the printer name, which means you have to remember the printer name. And if you're anything like me, that's really hard to do. Well, with the line printer command, or LP, it actually looks for an environment variable. If you don't specify the -D option, then that doesn't tell it a destination, so it looks for a variable to provide that. And that variable is just called LP dest, which is short for LP destination. And you can set that really easy. Just to do it real quick, I can say LP dest equals, and then I would type in the name of the printer. In my case, HP underscore laserjet underscore M553 or M506 or whatever it is I'm doing, right? And once that variable is set, you can test it with like echo $LP dest, and I get that printer name back. If I were to put this in my bash RC file, then when I open up a new shell, that variable is now a session variable. And anytime I go to use the line printer command, I can just say LP and specify the file, and it will automatically know which printer I wanted to print to, unless I want to override it. I would just have to use -D to override. So that makes things a little bit easier to print from the command line.
So what other commands can we use to work with printers from the CLI?
All right, so I've used a couple of commands so far, and in the printing world, there's really 3 important commands. There's one to send a print job, one to check print status, and one to cancel a print job. If it gets stuck or something goes wrong or it's just taking too long, you can cancel it, right? So LP was the command that I used to print. Now, if I pull up the man page for LP, it just tells you it prints files. Very exciting.
Yeah.
If we do LP stat, same thing, print cup status information. So I get to see the status of my print jobs. And then cancel is one that I didn't use. But the way the cancel command works, it cancels print jobs. As long as you provide it the ID number for the print job you're trying to cancel, it knocks it out. Now, those 3 commands right there, LP, LP stat, and cancel, those are the System 5 Unix commands that are designed to manage printers. They were originally written for traditional line printers in LPD, and Apple has rewritten them to work with cups. Well, Apple isn't completely Unix compliant because they're a BSD system. And in the BSD world, they actually have a different set of tools. And those tools actually mirror these identically. And because we installed cups, we actually have both set of tools. We have the Sys5 Linux tools and we have the BSD tools. So the BSD equivalent for these, instead of LP, you would use a command called LPR. And if I pull up the document there, LPR prints files.
Yay.
Yeah, not very exciting there. Slightly different command line structure, but otherwise it prints files. That's what it does. And instead of LP stat, we have LPQ because we're looking at the printer queues when you pull up the statistics. So they just called it LPQ. And you'll see here, show printer queue statistics. And then instead of cancel, you have LPRM. You're removing a print job. So I pull that up, LPRM, cancel print jobs. Those commands, when you install cups or cups is already installed, you get both sets. And so if you like the System 5 tools, you got them. If you like the BSD tools, you've got them too. And at the end of the day, they do the exact same things. You can kind of pick and choose between them, but they are installed by default with cups. So you've got them, and it's just up to you which one you want to use.
Awesome information, Don. Thank you very much. Supporting printers, another wonderful episode brought to you by IT Pro TV and Don Pizzette. And Don, before we move on, what else would you like to say?
Really the hardest part about working with drivers in Unix or with printers in Unix is the driver, right? The driver is the hard part. If a manufacturer doesn't release a driver for a printer, you're going to be hard pressed to get it working. So that's the first place you want to start is with the manufacturer and their information. On the exam, they're going to try and stay a little more neutral, though, so they're going to focus more on things like getting printers functional that are already operational in the system. So that's something you want to be familiar with, but definitely learn it from the command line and the web interface. The web interface almost seems too easy, but most security administrators will shut it off. They'll block it, and so you can't get to the web interface anymore, and then you rely on that command line. So definitely be aware of that.
Good stuff to know. Thanks again, Don. And here's some more good stuff for you. Make sure you watch every single episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. Oh, it's going to help you now and in the future. Do some more studying, take some more notes, keep learning, and take advantage of the supplementary information in our course library. It's there to do only one thing, help you go even further. So check that out, too. And tell everybody you know about IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV is binge-worthy. Thanks for watching. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
We will see you again very soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.